My first radio was a handheld radio. Chances are yours was too. And many people get their first radio experience on a handheld. But is it a good choice? I'll explain some personal experience and why it might be a good choice. So, my first radio was a Kenwood TH215 handheld radio. I bought it used from a local ham in Trinidad and used it by itself, but also attached to an antenna mounted on my dad's house on a roof. This radio put out 7 watts of power and was 2 meters only, but had a digital display and a keypad, which was a real luxury. It was pretty nice. But I moved on from that later on. I got into other kind of radios, but the handheld was a good first experience. But what made the handheld radio so useful for me was not the features nor the band coverage. It was the people. You see, for most people, ham radio is a means to communicate. Yes, it can be, and for the most part, it is a technically inclined hobby. But by and large, it's a social network of friends and people who you make friends with, or maybe just random people you talk to. The bottom line, though, is that you need people to communicate with to really get into ham radio. And that's what made the handheld radio a great choice as my first radio. You see, in Trinidad and Tobago, we had a really close knit group of hams. We had a local group of people who I could get on and talk to at any time, pretty much. We had 2 repeaters, and most of us would be active on the repeaters. Now, for those of you who are new to ham radio, a repeater is basically a station, probably on a hilltop or some sort of location like that, that extends the range of smaller radios like handhelds and mobile radios in your car. The repeaters, more importantly though, were a meeting place for local amateur radio operators because it extended far and wide, and a lot of people could get on. And on the repeaters, I would not just talk to people, but I would listen, particularly at night, to the conversations between different hams. But usually what I would hear were 2 experienced hams, Arnhem 9Y4AR and Tech 9Y4LP. Both of them are now gone and silent key, as we say, but they used to talk about everything under the sun. But anyway, that aside, talking on the radio was not about just people I knew, because that would kind of narrow your choices, right? One of the great ways to talk to local ham radio operators was to check in on the local nets, and we had a couple of them. But nets are basically round tables of ham radio operators. The most common format is a directed net, where you have one station who directs a net. This is a net control station, or the net controller as they call it. This person would take check-ins, and then he or she would call people in turn. Not to worry though, I'll do another video on nets, but I thought I'd explain a little bit to you anyway. But anyway, nets were a great way to get introduced to the local hams, and you can then meet interesting people and talk to them and maybe make friends. And then they can help you get established in ham radio. They can be a gateway to other activities since, guess what most hams talk about on radio? Yeah, we talk about ham radio a lot. I learned about things like HF, packet radio, and even amateur TV. So yes, you can indeed talk to people. But what else does your handheld radio good for? Well, one of the things I like is always having a radio where I can listen to stuff. A lot of radio is listening. Not just like broadcast radio and stuff, right? But all sorts of other types of radio. You see, several years ago, even before I was an undergrad at NYU Engineering School, back then it was called Polytechnic University, we had a huge power outage in New York City and all of the Northeast. I got stuck in the subway. I didn't know what was going on. But my trusty handheld radio allowed me to listen to the NYPD and transit police and the MTA, who didn't really tell us much over the loudspeakers, but over the radio they were talking about exactly what was going on. So yeah, this was the blackout of '03, by the way, and that was like, what, 22 years ago? But still, it was amazing to be able to listen. I know you don't have to have the same capability with a smartphone. I mean, you don't have the same capability with a smartphone anyway, because most of them don't have signal underground, and you don't always have internet everywhere you go. So a handheld radio helps you bridge that gap. It helps you listen. And yeah, these days you can buy a Baofeng for less than $20, but it has limited listening capability. I would encourage you, though, to consider getting a radio that has wider frequency receive coverage, even if it's used. My favorite older radio is the Yaesu VX5, and I'll do a video about it sometime. But any of the other Yaesu VX series were excellent. Today you have, I think they still make the VX6, and even the FD5DR with wide receive coverage is good to have. Kenwood radios like D75 have the same advantage of, they have the advantage of single sideband as well, but they can get pricey. If all you can afford is a Baofeng, I wouldn't hold that against you. It's still better than nothing, right? One last thing, by the way, ham radio isn't just earth stations and handheld radios. Even if you have just the included thing, if you just have the included antenna, you can actually talk to the International Space Station and other satellites. Pretty cool, right? Of course, if you have other equipment like arrow antennas and stuff like that, you can get on. I will say a handheld radio is a great radio to have. But there are two sides to every story. And in the next video, I will talk about why you should not get a handheld radio. Until next time, I am N2RJ, Ria, peace, and 73.